Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Marketing for Consent, How to Make GDPR Compliance Work for You. I'm Megan Tobin, VP of Marketing here at Send With Us, and the moderator today. Just a few housekeeping items quickly, and then we'll get started. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please type in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. We'll be answering questions at the end. Please use your questions tab and to enter them as we go, and we'll get to as many as we can. If we don't get to your questions during today's webinar, we'll follow up after. A recorded web version of this webinar will be available, and we'll send this to you shortly after the webinar. Please share the webinar with colleagues who may also be interested. For those of you just joining us, welcome to Marketing for Consent, How to Make GDPR Compliance Work for You. Let's get started. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Will Warren is VP of Engineering at Send With Us and our resident security and compliance expert. Matt Harris is CEO at Send With Us and has extensive email and product expertise. Will?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So I'm Will Warren. I'm the VP of Engineering here at Send With Us, and I'm responsible for ensuring that our product dispatch is GDPR compliant and making sure that all our vendor relationships also are GDPR compliant.
Great. So today we're going to be covering kind of what overview of what the GDPR is and who exactly it impacts, both from a business and a kind of a global perspective. Now we're going to focus in on the opportunity that GDPR actually provides to businesses for improving customer relationships as you become compliant, and then kind of focus on how to maximize the opportunity that GDPR presents. So what we're trying to do is take a positive approach on the force that GDPR is and what's it requiring businesses to do. Megan already covered some of this housekeeping. I'll just lightly touch on it again. This is being recorded. We'll follow up with a link. We have a follow-up white paper which goes into a lot more detail than we're going to go into today. So if there's the examples we bring up or the things you want to dig into more, I'd recommend checking out the white paper. You can ask questions in the chat. We'll try to address as many as we can. And if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up and try to address it in a blog post or another piece. And a quick legal disclaimer that this is intended for informational purposes and shouldn't be construed as legal advice. So let's jump in. Will, what is the GDPR?
That's a great question. So GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, and essentially it's a set of regulations that help protect the privacy and security of European Union customer data. And so this was put in place by the European Union, and they've set up relationships with bodies in the United States, in Canada, and various other nationalities that allow them to enforce the GDPR. So this is coming into effect on May 25th, so very soon. And we have yet to see exactly kind of how these regulations will be enforced, but companies such as Microsoft and Oracle are taking this very seriously. And so it's probably going to be impactful across the board in a number of different ways, but we'll stay on top of that and keep you updated. So essentially GDPR, the regulations state that you as an organization that collects data about European Union citizens must give them control over their own data, must give them access to that data and allow them to remove that data when they want. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about 6 of the principles that we think are really important. I'm going to touch on each of these individually. So the data controller versus data processor, data portability, intended purpose, privacy by design, the right to be forgotten, and of course, big penalties, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So an important concept and the vernacular of the GDPR is data controller versus data processor. So this is an important concept to understand. So a data controller is any organization that actively collects European Union user data in order to do something with it. So email addresses, names, actual physical addresses, anything that pertains to information about that person. If you intend to provide some service, you are a data controller. On the other hand, a data processor is anyone that you give that data to in order for you to help you do your business. So for example, you may input users' data into Salesforce. So Salesforce for your organization will be a data processor. And it's important to note the differences between these because in order to be GDPR compliant with all of the people that you give EU data to, you have to have a data protection agreement in place with them. And so for Salesforce, you'll need to have a data protection agreement as a data processor for your data, whereas you are a data controller and they'll need to have one signed with you on that grounds. Data portability is the concept of allowing European users to request their data from your system. So if you're a data controller and you have data about European users, you have to be able to give that data back to them in a format that's useful for them, but also useful for machines. So you can't just send a PDF of all of the information. You actually have to give that data out in a way that can then be processed by a machine, so CSV or tab delimited or something like that. This concept also is important for users if they want you to move the data you have on them to another controller. So they may reasonably ask you to say, move this information from Salesforce to some other kind of data controller that you have available to you. And again, those formats have to be interchangeable. Intended purpose, which Matt is going to talk a lot more about, is the concept that the data you have collected, you can only use it for a stated purpose that a European Union user has agreed to. So if you're collecting information and you decide that you want to do something else with that information, you have to go and get consent again to use that information in that new way. And then privacy by design. So this is important for the people who are actually building the systems and building the products that you're going to be interacting with. And this is the concept of ensuring that you're thinking about how you're going to store and protect this data from the beginning and the inception of your product. So this includes making sure you encrypt all your data, making sure it's encrypted at rest, and a whole bunch of other kind of initiatives that are covered by a lot of other compliance initiatives too, like SOC 2 covers a lot of this off as well. Also importantly is the right to be forgotten. So this is the concept that a European Union user can write in and ask to have their data deleted where applicable. There may be laws that govern your current jurisdiction where for tax purposes you might have to keep that information around for 7 years, but by and large this is an important technological concept. And then big penalties. So the penalties have teeth. This is why people are taking this seriously. So the EU regulations are saying that it will be 4% of revenue per infraction or 20 million euros, whichever is larger. And so these can be incredibly significant penalties.
It's really expensive. So let's talk about who does the GDPR actually apply to? This is a really interesting concept that some people are struggling to understand. And so what matters about GDPR is not the customer's citizenship, but actually their physical location. So this means GDPR applies to any customer that you might be communicating with who is within the European Union. So what matters here is even if your intent is not to target people in the European Union, if you accidentally collect, store, process data from people within the European Union, the GDPR mandates that you must store, process, and collect that data in a compliant manner. So this is one way to think about this is, let's say perhaps that you're a US-based nationwide kind of e-commerce retailer, and your only market that you focus on is the American market. Despite that, if someone from the EU comes to your website, signs up for your email list, maybe makes an online purchase through your store and thus gives you their email address, their address, their credit card, all these other information, even though your business mandate and your intent is only to work and operate within the United States and with Americans, because that person you're selling to, regardless of citizenship, is physically located in the EU, you're technically in violation of the GDPR and could potentially be sought after by the governing body behind this. Now, there's a low risk of this actually happening. So there's a calculus that has to happen here of deciding for your business what the risk is. Now that said, we're going to go into some principles on why we think everyone should be doing these things. So it's kind of talking about what about your non-EU EU customers. I think that what we want to talk about here is that it doesn't really make sense to start establishing a double standard for people within the EU and people outside of the EU. And the reason for this is that the reason that GDPR is coming about is not because some crazy lawmakers customers and consumers nowadays actually have a enhanced expectation for privacy and for data portability and for transparency around how you're going to use their data, especially in light of recent events on how internet companies have been using people's data. So just because you're American or other customers might not be legally required for this, I think we think very strongly that setting a double standard for your customers is really going to penalize businesses, and customers are going to start to expect this and be looking for this. So our recommendation, what we're seeing a large trend in, especially amongst enterprise, is establishing global privacy and data policies that are GDPR compliant, that apply to all customers, not just EU ones. And we think this is the best path moving forward. When you think about the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal that's happening this last year, this is going to materially change how consumers are thinking about their data and how it's being shared. And we expect other laws to be passed in other countries that are similar in strength to GDPR. And so it's kind of like there's a sense of future-proofing as well if you move to make GDPR relevant for all of your customers, not just the EU-based ones. So we actually see some really strong opportunities behind GDPR. And so for a second, let's throw out the concept and the entire thought process of GDPR, and let's just think about these two statements. The first statement is that your customers want exceptional, personalized brand experiences, and when you don't provide them, they'll find a competitor who will. I think this is true for all businesses today, especially consumer-facing enterprise, that increasingly the brand experience is what consumers focus on and what they differentiate on. And so every enterprise is now facing this challenge of trying to differentiate based on experience. We definitely think that this is true with or without the conversation on GDPR. The second statement, customers are reticent, and rightfully so, when you think about the Equifax or Facebook scandals, about sharing personal data you need in order to deliver those experiences. So the ask of asking a customer now to hand over an email address, their address, or preferences they have about different products, people are more and more concerned and thinking more and more about their data in terms of how you're actually going to use this, who you're going to share it with, and those kind of things. And so, this is in the forefront of consumers, and it's actually by becoming GDPR compliant, you can really address both of these in a really great way. We think this is a great opportunity of GDPR. It's a forcing function within your organization because of the legal requirement that allows you to actually really address a really great customer opportunity. So how does this impact a marketing organization? We think this kind of impacts marketing in four major ways. The first, you need to embrace the fact that your consumers actually own their data, right? I think in the old world of email marketing, marketers are incredibly protective of their list and the list they build. But really, your list is a combination of data that customers have trusted you with, and it's really their data in the first place. Email marketers have for a long time had a motto of thinking, you have to establish value for when you ask for an email. There's common marketing lines of thinking of asking for an email sign up. You have to present the customer, here's the value of giving the email sign up. With the change in how consumers are thinking about their data and privacy, this goes to the next step of thinking not just what's in it for me for giving up my email address, but what's in it for me for all of the data I'm going to be sharing with you. And I think that's the second major impact this is going to be having on marketers. The third is that because we're moving into a world where there's going to be added steps for anytime you're collecting data from customers, those added steps will increase the amount of drop-off that's happening. Because GDPR requires you to inform a customer how you might be using their data that you're collecting, as Will shared, you have to share how you're going to be using data when you ask to collect it. Any added step is going to increase the amount of drop-off you're seeing. And so one of the impacts we think this is going to have is prioritizing kind of more precision insights over bulk data decisions and analytics. the trend in the last few years in marketing has been moving towards higher and higher degrees of personalization, and kind of moving away from batch and blast and kind of the old days of spam email. I think it's going to be increased with the amount of effort required in order to collect a piece of data. Marketers are going to need to be even more diligent about trying to use that data to make really personalized experiences for their customers. The final opportunity for marketing here is that, as you think about your GDPR compliance and moving forward here, you really want to think about, how to get your data collection and consent processes built out in the first place in a way that's really scalable and allows you to test and iterate on them. And the parallel I'll draw here is that in the last decade, technologies that allow you to test landing pages and forms for higher conversion rates, software like that has become increasingly popular because marketers identify that by correctly messaging the value of signing up, they're going to see higher conversion rates. This holds true for all aspects of this data collection and consent process that you're now required to do as well. So you need to ensure you have the technologies you choose to do this with, and process how you decide to build this. You need to scale it with your customer base as well. You need to give the ability to test different things, test messaging and other things here. One example of how this might work is that because you're required now to tell a customer how you might use their data, like what's the intent of collecting this data, many marketers might be inclined to just immediately ask for everything. Go for the kitchen sink and say, hey, we're going to use this data for personalization, for recommendation, for insights. We're going to use it for this and that, and just want to go for a laundry list of intent. And that might be worth testing against a more selective list of saying, hey, to a customer, hey, we're going to use this data for just two things: to provide you a really great and personalized product experience, and to provide you really relevant recommendations. So on one hand, you're asking for everything. On the other hand, you're asking for very specific things in order to provide very specific value. And if you need to have a consent collection process that allows you to test these two different opportunities. There we go. So we think we want to kind of take a three-prong approach to this new opportunity. And we want this idea of market for consent is broken into three parts. So first to address is your existing data. And we're going to jump into this in a second, but this is probably the scariest part about GDPR for many marketers, in that you have to kind of throw out your existing data, your existing list, which is a scary proposition. Next, focus on the new data you're going to be collecting and how to collect that data, how to get consent properly, and how to discuss intent with the customer. And finally, the third component of this is look at existing communications you already have with customers that might not be within the marketing wheelhouse today. And we're just going to discuss how you can optimize those existing communications to pull them into the marketing fold and kind of enhance the communications and experience you're having with customers. So let's start and talk about the data you already have. At face value, there's no grandfather clause under GDPR. This means to continue using your customer's data after May 25th, if that person is physically located within the EU, that customer must grant their consent for you to continue using their data, even if they've already done so at some point in the past. So, in another way of saying this, if you want to be GDPR compliant, you must have every single customer reconsent for you to use every piece of data you have on them, and you have to inform them of your intent of using that data going forward. I think this is really scary for many marketers, and rightfully so. This is a really big challenge. But this challenge also presents a really great opportunity to just audit your current customer data, not just your email list, but everything else, every piece of data you're using for marketing today. Marketers, and especially email marketers, are probably familiar with the concept of doing a list audit and sunsetting people from your email list. And sunsetting is a concept of if a customer doesn't engage with your marketing emails over a period of months, you actually sunset them and automatically remove them from your email list, and thereby, if they're not engaging and you continue to send an email, that could actually damage your email reputation and spam scores. So the sunsetting concept has become popular in the last couple of years. This opportunity with GDPR is a really great chance for you to do a very thorough audit and a very thorough sunset of your customer list. So, for example, if you have someone who hasn't engaged with your emails in over a year, you might not even want to include them in that reconsent campaign, or you might want to try to send them a completely different reconsent campaign. It's a really good opportunity to thoroughly analyze what customer data you have, what data you actually need going forward, and if there's segments of your audience who you don't need to be included into this, and you don't need to spend time trying to get their reconsent. All this boils down to you need to run marketing campaigns of some kind to your existing subscriber list, and then to request them to reconsent. Now, this doesn't have to be a really boring email with a line of something like, we're asking for your consent to keep you in our email list because the GDPR says we have to. Again, this is not a great approach for multiple reasons. The first reason we addressed earlier is that you don't want to be doing this just because GDPR says you have to. You want to do this because you value your customers' data, you value the trust they place in you when you give them that data, and you want to communicate to them how seriously you take this. Optimizely did a really great example of reconsent campaign as an example here on the right. And it's, can we tell you about digital experimentation? And I really love this email because it's not saying about GDPR. It's not talking about, in their case, not even really addressing privacy. What they're addressing is the core value of why you would want to receive a marketing email from Optimizely, because they're experts in digital experimentation, and they want to include you in this. They want to include their customers in this journey of learning about digital experimentation, about sharing stories they see and other things. And so, this is a really great example of a reconsent campaign, and I think any business that runs any kind of marketing, email marketing, can probably send a similar style of email. And again, what you're doing here is you're emphasizing the benefits to the customer of consuming their subscription. Now, if you click through on this email, you are going to see a page that tells you about the types of data that Optimizely is collecting or has on their customers, as well as their intent of how they want to use this data. And it's really important that you remember those two key components of this process. If you want to look more in depth as an example of Optimizely, a link is included in this presentation, which we'll send out afterwards, as well in the white paper that we've released on this topic. All right, so we've talked about the existing data. Let's talk about the new data now and the consent to use it. So consent is actually only one of the 6 legal pillars of data processing under GDPR, but it's one of the ones that impacts marketers the most. It's one of the ones that impacts marketers the most. First of all, consent needs to be you don't just have a button or some text on your form that asks for consent. It actually has to be documented and tracked. And you have to have a method or a way to actually demonstrate back to authorities if you're challenged that you did get this consent. And so there's some technicalities in how that's to be collected. Let's not focus on the scary part or the negative side there of what's required. Focus on the positive here is that you have an opportunity now to be really transparent with customers about how you're collecting data, what value they're going to get out of sharing that data with you, and how you're going to provide a better customer experience, how you're better going to deliver on whatever core value you have, and an opportunity to discuss how you're going to safeguard it. We work with at Semmelus and Dispatch, we work with many large enterprises, and we've seen how their engineering and their legal and product teams have been undergoing huge efforts to ensure they can be GDPR compliant. And as a marketer, you want to make use of all this valuable time that's being spent and turn this into a great marketing message. For example, if your teams have been going through processes of increasing like database security or enhancing encryption or doing other things like this, this is valuable to your customers, and you might have to address it from a higher level perspective on this is how we're enhancing security, or these are things we're doing to increase the the levels of encryption we're using. But either way, that's valuable things that you want to communicate to your customers. So let's break down asking for consent, and this is kind of broken out into 5 parts and how you want to address this. First is that you want to make sure your consent requests are clear and concise. You're required by law to ensure that you use plain language here. And you have to provide specific information on how the customer can cancel or change their consent, as well as how they can change, delete, or transfer their data. And this makes sense from a marketing perspective. I mean, your consent is kind of a complicated idea and concept. And so making sure you present it to your customer as plainly as possible is definitely in your favor, and this is going to help. And the other components here, just like there's a prevalence now of marketing preferences or email preferences. Many firms now provide, hey, you can subscribe to our daily newsletter or our weekly newsletter and separating those out. Providing customers those options on what newsletter they subscribe to is very valuable, and many firms have adopted that. Just like that, you want to take a similar approach to how a customer might interact with their data. Let them provide easy ways for them to change their consent or modify their consent or modify how you're using their data. So the second part here is that you need to make a separate request for each piece of data and for each processing activity you're going to be undertaking. So I mentioned this before. It's just you need to communicate to customers what data you're going to collect and how you're going to use that data. The language needs to be plain, but you do have an opportunity here to present this in a positive light. As an example, one way of saying this is, hey, we're going to collect your in-app activity, like what buttons you're clicking on or what pages you visit, and we're going to use that with machine learning to provide some benefit. Another way to address that is hey, we're going to collect your app activity, and we're going to use that to provide you with a more personalized experience, and maybe not show you screens that are less relevant to you. Something. So you can address this from a value standpoint to the customer. I would say here one thing, because you're adding in these extra steps, you want to keep only ask for what you need and only when you need it. If you keep your consent requests small and precise, staggered throughout the customer journey, you'll not only minimize possible resistance, you also establish a level of transparency that will incrementally build trust along the way. So one way to think about this is it's very popular in mobile apps. Mobile apps today require asking for permission to use different capabilities of the phone, whether it's like the GPS and location API, or requesting to use a camera to store data. Mobile apps has to ask for these permissions. And when this first came out, many mobile apps would just ask for all the permissions up front and have this, ask for the kitchen sink. Eventually, customers were found to be kind of reluctant to do that. I just installed this app and I opened it up, and all of a sudden it's asking for use every single component on my phone. And eventually apps started switching to a model where the customer hit a point where where the app needed to use a particular capability, would it actually ask for that? You open up a camera app and you go to take a photo, and then it finally asks you, hey, can we have access to the camera? And this kind of more modular approach to asking for permission has been really successful. That same analogy applies to asking for consent as well. Do this in a modular fashion when you're addressing it in the customer journey where it makes sense. Next, this is more from the implementation side, but you have to ask your customers to grant consent by an affirmative action. So what do we mean by this? I'll draw an example back to subscribing for an email newsletter. In the past, in the early days of email marketing, it was common to have a sign-up form that had a tick box that was automatically ticked that said, yes, please subscribe me for my newsletter. And this is kind of through the years being developed and seen as kind of actually a bad practice by automatically subscribing a customer to a newsletter. This stands true for consent as well. It doesn't actually fly to have a tick box that says, yes, I consent to all these things and all this data processing. You actually have to have a button that and a call out, like an affirmative action that says that the customer can click on and say, yes, I consent to this activity. This needs to be really clear and presented in such a way, kind of like you might do a double opt-in for an email confirmation. We'll get into that in a second. Yeah. Fourth, it's important as you're asking for consent and presenting your intent to make a clear and compelling case for the benefits of the customer that they'll realize. This goes back to the point number 2, and how we mentioned how you should ask for consent as part of the customer journey. It should always make obvious sense to the customer why they would want to grant you this consent, why your intent to use that data aligns with some value that they're going to get. Maybe it's, hey, can we want to collect data on your purchase behavior because we want to provide you recommendations going forward. That's a very clear value to the customer. Like, I want recommendations on, perhaps new apparel or shirts that I'm gonna like. Of course, I want to share that data with you, and I'm happy to have you process that data and use it to provide me with recommendations. So make sure it's because a compelling benefit to the customer here. And then finally, as part of all this, I think addressing the core shift in customer mentality here and consumer mentality here that we're talking about is customers being more data and privacy concerned. So include language in here on how you're going to safeguard this data. And alongside this, there's a mandatory requirement that you link to a privacy policy. So of course, you can have just a dry link to a privacy policy, or you can present the value that your firm has taken, the steps your firm has taken to protect their data alongside that link to a privacy policy. So we actually think that asking for consent will improve email marketing. And one of the main ways that we think is going to impact this is that by asking for consent and by focusing on the specific value you're going to provide customers, this kind of goes hand in hand with changing your focus as a marketer from overall list size to really focusing on list quality. And this goes hand in hand with this old email marketing idea of sunsetting people from your email list. This data-centric world is kind of taking this to the next step, and you're not just sunsetting people from your email list, but you're actually focusing on ensuring that your email list and the value you promise to those customers is being realized in how you're using their data. So we think this is overall going to improve ROI. Obviously, if there's the additional steps, the consent step and the intent step that people are going to take in order to sign up, you will see drop off from some people there. But once people get through that, they're going to be much more engaged and much more motivated if they've gone through those steps to sign up. And so you're going to see higher results as well from those people subscribing. We think there's some additional steps here that people should take. Number 1 here is establish a double opt-in. The first thing is that a double opt-in provides a really great and easy mechanism for you to establish consent and intent around how you're going to use people's data. So it kind of is an established consumer workflow. It's something people are used to doing double opt-in. They've done it in the past. That allows you to insert a consent and intent collection as well in a really easy way. So I think this is a really good process that people should adopt when looking at being GDPR compliant. There's numerous other benefits to double opt-in, and I think it's kind of the gold standard now in email marketing. So it's definitely something that should be adopted alongside this if you're not doing this already. We think as well that transactional and triggered email become a great place to focus on from our marketing team. In this, as you see, some additional drop off that people sign up for your overall email list, you're going to need to find different ways to address your existing customer base that's outside of your email subscriptions. And transactional and triggered emails are a really great way to address this. And I'll go into more detail in that second. And finally, alongside those transactional and triggered emails, look to optimize drip campaigns and automated campaigns you already have running that people are consenting to receive. And in general, the idea here is that what we're trying to present is shift your focus as a marketer away from just using promotional and campaign email as the only driver of your conversation with your customers throughout their journey, and really open this up and start looking at every other touch point you're having with these customers that you might not have had an opportunity to optimize before, and bring those into your overall fold as a marketing organization. So let's go into a double opt-in and talk about this a little bit. So what is a double opt-in? I've talked about this a little bit, and just in case you're not familiar, what a double opt-in is that it's saying you're going to have to ask the customer to opt in twice in order to confirm their subscription to your newsletter. So physically, what this looks like is someone goes to your website and there's an email capture form and says, hey, subscribe to our newsletter. We're going to send you really cute pictures of cats every day. And I love cats. I want to subscribe to this newsletter. So I enter my email address and I click subscribe. But that doesn't automatically put me on the newsletter. I get a confirmation email in my inbox that I need to go and look at. In that confirmation email, there's a big blue button that says, hey, Matt, we know you're interested in our daily cat pictures. We want to send you daily cat pictures. Here's an example of a really cute daily cat picture, and I'm really excited now. And it has a button that says, hey, click here to confirm your subscription to receive daily cat pictures. Obviously, me being incredibly motivated to receive daily cat pictures, I'm going to click on that button. And now I've double opted in to receive this, to receive daily cat pictures. So with this, with the GDPR requirement around consent and intent, this double opt-in procedure is a great way to introduce the consent and intent process as well. And so, with proper tracking, that double opt-in can be counted towards the consent component here. So, the next component here is that once someone clicks through in that double opt-in button, usually you take them to a subscription successful page where you'd celebrate with the customer of, hey, we're so excited you've opted in for, in my example, daily cat pictures. But this is also a really great place for you now to communicate with your customer and go back to the security and privacy components of what you're promising to them. And so, and as well with email marketing, establishing value, establishing frequency, and just really setting expectations is incredibly important. And so use this subscription successful page in order to address this, in order to address the expectations the customer might have around the type of email and frequency, as well as a great chance to introduce them to your preference center. So typically preference centers in the past have really focused around their subscription preferences. So like, hey, I want to receive cat pictures daily or maybe just weekly. But now you actually have the option to include the preference center around the data points and what data you're going to use and how you're going to process that data and allow them to consent through that preference center. As well, and optionally, you have an opportunity to ask for additional data points. Ask them, hey, you've now consented to receive the daily newsletter. If you provide us with this additional information, not only will you get great cat pictures, but these, there's going to be some recommendation component in here that we're going to integrate into this experience as well. We can enhance this data, we can enhance this experience further, make it better, provide you more value if we do these next things. And this kind of goes back to my earlier point of don't ask for all of the data and consent you're going to need up front, but rather stagger it out through the customer journey. And you can actually, in this way, kind of reward a customer the further and deeper they go. Let's move on here. So let's talk about kind of the transactional and triggered emails. Really what I want to establish here is that you're going to have to change fundamentally how you think about email marketing because the number of people you can email as well as what data you're allowed to email with them is going to change significantly. And this provides a really great opportunity to start addressing some of your marketing objectives through your transactional and triggered email. Just an example of what I mean by these. So any email that's sent to an individual as a result of an action triggered on your site or are necessary as part of an ongoing existing relationship with a customer. So this includes some examples here. So an order confirmation. I'm on Amazon or another large e-commerce retailer. I make a purchase. I'm getting order confirmation. I'm going to get a receipt from that purchase as well. You may need to send legal notices or app notifications, extremely popular transaction emails, shipping notifications, and password resets. So when you think about how to optimize these and include these in the marketing fold, these actually provide a massive opportunity to extend all of your marketing efforts beyond acquisition and activation. At a minimum, one way to think about this is you have a requirement now as a marketer to get run reconsent campaigns and get consent from all your existing customers on how to use all their existing data. So at a minimum, you should think about using your transactional emails as a way and a vehicle to ask for reconsent. One example could be adding in a component at the bottom of your standard transactional emails that mentions, hey, dear customer, we've noticed you're also subscribed for our email list. We're launching some new projects in the near future that are going to make better use of your data to launch more personalized campaigns. And we're asking that you consent to these new things, much like that Optimizely example of hey, join us and learn more about digital experimentation. Take that whatever value you're presenting to the customer in reconsent and embed that directly in your transactional emails. And as long as this is done in a tasteful manner, meaning it doesn't turn the customers off, and that it's a very small component of the overall experience, by law, you're allowed to do this level of marketing within that transactional email. Again, it has to be a small component. There's laws about the percentage of the email that can be this as well. You want it to be tasteful and not just distract significantly away from the overall intention of that transactional email. So another reason why this is really important is that when you think about your overall customer lifecycle, your marketing or promotional emails are very kind of referred to as being top of funnel. These are high-level activities that drive customers to your website or your app and overall. But your transactional and triggered emails are deeply embedded in the overall customer experience, and they're actually often overlooked by marketing organizations. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of take these touch points that are extremely valuable with customers and bring them in the marketing fold. At a minimum, you can look at using these emails to reinforce your transparency, privacy, and trust messaging. Ensuring that these emails are on brand, ensuring that these emails match the look and feel, match the level of quality and experience that your customers expect, and talk to the data and privacy efforts you're taking. You can use these to encourage opt-ins into different email marketing programs. Or another really great use of transactional emails, and that's something that is, I think, now almost a standard in industry, is using these emails as an opportunity to solicit referrals or reviews. I think almost everyone who has bought something online has, in a purchase receipt, seen a link or some kind of call out to actually provide a review of that item they've just purchased. And then, companies such as Dropbox are infamous for, in their early days, the really great social referral programs they would run. And a core component of that actually was calling out the referral programs in their transactional emails. And so these are kind of baseline opportunities that marketers can take, an opportunity that GDPR and this change now presents. So one thing to think about as well is that there's data that which you've collected that requires consent for you to use in personalization. So an example here, if you get location data from your customers, or if you get download or activity data from your customers, the location data you might want to use to make location-specific offers. Let's say you're in an on-demand food business, and you want to make offers specifically to customers in San Francisco, and you're going to have to ensure that you already collected consent, and then they know you have the intent to do location-specific marketing. On the other hand, on the activity side, let's say you have a business where people are downloading some content from you on a regular basis, and you want to include some kind of celebration with the customer when they've made their 10th download. Well, you need to ensure that they know that they've consented to you collecting this download information and that activity, as well as consented to providing them some kind of recommendations or personalization based on that. And so both of these are examples of really great customer experiences. In the customer journey, I've done now my 10th download, and you want to celebrate that with me, and that's really important. You have to ensure that you've got the required consent for that. On the other hand, there's data that actually don't need consent for. For example, pulling in other types of data like weather data, you don't need consent in order to pull in weather data and data that's outside of what the customer is providing for you. as well as related item data. So, books by the same author, for example, on an e-commerce purchase. Yeah. This is just important to think about as you plan out different marketing campaigns and as you ask for consent and you present your intent. Think about what's required and what's not going to be required here. And something here to think about here is obviously with all of this, ensuring that you're testing frequently in order to refine your overall messaging here. This goes without saying across the board with marketing efforts that you need to be testing messaging, preferably always. The one challenge with the opportunity that I think transactional presents is that, as I mentioned earlier, it's typically not in the hands of the marketing team today. And in fact, some marketers aren't even familiar with what a transactional email is. And it's typically owned by an engineering organization today. So this might require some changes to your existing processes or tools. And I would say focus on finding tools that allow you to store your email templates and transactional templates and update them without requiring going back to an engineer. Especially, this is difficult when you need to involve a developer or an engineer in every single email change. You just need to find a creative solution to do this, to get you the email out of source code and enable marketing or enable product people or someone else to own this content. So obviously the right system is going to allow you to create and test and optimize this email content outside of source code, as well as address the other challenges that global enterprise faces today, like localization of content to match wherever your audience is. You can definitely reach out to our team, and we're happy to discuss this and recommend solutions far and wide. So next, let's talk about automated drip campaigns. I think this is a really interesting component of how GDPR and this data privacy world kind of impacts email marketing. So the GDPR does provide specific protections against automated decisions based on profiling. And this really applies to drip campaigns when the future emails are going to be automated based on user behavior. So for example, let's say you have an onboarding campaign for new customers or new blog subscriber, and you want to modify the behavior of the future emails based on what they've been clicking on and whether or not they've been opening it. Or let's say you're doing nurture campaigns based on downloaded content and with white papers or anything else. So there's actually provisions in the GDPR specifically protecting against this kind of profiling automated decisions. So what do you need to do as a marketer? Well, you need to ask for consent and intent. So you can still run these compliant as long as you address this concern. So number one, you have to request consent to use the customer's data for this data purpose. We already kind of discussed this. There's a specific application here to drip campaigns. You have to specifically say, hey, your interactions with your email are going to be used to further enhance your overall experience, and you consent to let us collect that data, as well as for the additional purposes you might want to use. So not just we're going to collect your email, but we're going to also look at our intent of collecting that data is to send you email as well as to personalize that experience going forward. And finally, you have to provide the opportunity for them to opt out, both kind of upfront when you initially ask for it, as well as you have to make it really simple for them afterwards to opt out of that drip campaign as well. So drip campaigns are a really good opportunity to market for consent. I think drip campaigns are not going to go away in any sense of the word. But you do have to think specifically about how you want to optimize and manage your campaigns going forward, and ask for the consent and discuss the intent with the customer about it. Yeah, and specifically, I think moving to a world where opt-in is it's a default to opt-out, meaning that by default, once the customer kind of goes through your form, they're going to be opted out, and they have to specifically opt in is really important, and that puts an added onus on you, the marketer, to establish the value with the customer, tell them why they should want to opt into this and what they're going to get out of it, and why their valuable data is worth trading with you for that experience. All right. So at a high level, what does marketing consent mean? This means using your marketing skills to communicate your customer experience you're going to offer, and explain and show them and tell them why they should share that data with you. And this kind of, I think, is really ties hand in hand with the trend we've seen in the last couple of years to focus on customer experience overall. This goes hand in hand with that. And part of that customer experience is the trust in the data and security that you're going to provide them. And you need to specifically message and talk to them about that. It means adding in messaging around process around consent and optimizing for customers feeling comfortable giving you this consent. And it means building a strong trust language into your overall messaging, and obviously ensuring that you actually deliver on that trust as well. I already mentioned that as an organization, you're likely going through a transition right now towards enhancing your customers' data security, enhancing the data portability, all these other things, and this is like literally millions of dollars are being spent right now in ensuring this customer data is secure. And you as a marketer need to properly communicate that value back to the customer. And that's part of this. And once you've delivered on this quality and demonstrated that you're worthy, the customer is going to be more willing to grant consent in the future. They're going to be eager to do so, and that reinforces the idea that consent shouldn't be a kitchen sink everything up front, but something you want to include in the overall customer journey. And everything it doesn't have to be everything out of the gate, everything asking for consent up front. You can continue to make your case throughout your website, your ads, your blog posts, and everything else, and continue to drip this to the customer throughout the entire customer journey. Just with everything else and everything else marketing does, marketing is an experimentation department, an organization. So you need to be testing and retesting your consent messaging alongside all of your other messaging and optimizing to what's going to provide the best results at different stages in the customer journey. Whew. So with that, I'll open this up. Is there any questions? I feel like we've had a lot of really great questions come in so far.
So we have one question, sort of comment that I'm going to actually pose to Will, because you've been talking a long time, and also he is our GDPR security expert. Will, we have a question here that says that they'd like to challenge it's sort of a comment question, that they'd like to challenge the notion that inadvertent or occasional collection of EU personal data by a US company must be compliant with the GDPR. If you're not offering your services in the EU, how would Article 3 territorial scope apply? So could you address that a little bit for us, Will?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to prefix this answer by saying, I'm not a lawyer, and as mentioned, this webinar is not really legal advice. But I will say the territorial scope provision, Article 3, as mentioned, is pretty vaguely defined, and I'd be hesitant to rely on it as a reason to avoid compliance entirely. And our approach, and the one laid out here in this webinar, is to err on the side of caution where the specification is ambiguous, both for the sake of the customer experience that you're building and to mitigate the risk of those huge penalties and infractions that might be taken. The second point, the Recycle 171 consent obtained under the current directive is still valid if the manner in which the consent has been given is in line with the conditions of the regulations. So not necessarily true that all consents need to be refreshed. So that comment I agree with. But operationally, if you're going to have to go and get consent from your existing customer base, the work that you're going to have to do is pretty much identical. So in this case, it doesn't really matter. So even though it's not ambiguous here, the work is ambiguous.
So we don't have any other questions right now, but we'll hang out for just a minute and do some housekeeping. I know that thanks for everybody for hanging in with us for 55 whole minutes. It's a pretty meaty topic, and we tried to go into it as in-depth as we could. We will be sending the recording out to everyone afterwards, and as well as a link to our white paper. And we welcome to have further discussions. Thanks for joining us, and I don't see any more questions, so we'll log off now. Thanks. Oh, Matt, go ahead. Do you want to wrap up?
Absolutely. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Will, for providing that really great answer.
Yeah.
There. I will say, if you're interested in learning more, and specifically about our solutions behind some of the challenges we presented today, check out our website, dispatch.io, or pop us an email, sales@dispatch.io as well. We're here to help as an organization. We're education focused. I really believe that anyone who engages with us as a company should walk away learning more about email and how to provide their customers with a better experience. So please do reach out. With that, thank you for attending.
Thanks.